Welcome to podcast number 30. Once again, I appreciate everybody taking the time to listen to these and to write in. Very much appreciated, and keeps my motivation up. That's for sure. And also, if you do get a chance, when you do listen to these, please give some iTunes ratings or some SoundCloud ratings. That very much helps me out, and again keeps me motivated to make sure that there's more than 7 of you out there. So I appreciate that. So we're just going to dive right into to this podcast, and this is an interesting one, and it's quite honestly, it's one on some of the ones that I've done. They're very, very subjective, and so they're very hard to talk about in a podcast. But we're going to go ahead and try anyway. And this one's how to break bad habits. We get that a lot. Is actually one of the things that we get a lot is, oh my gosh, I'm going to come ride with Ken, but I need to go do some track days before I ride with Ken because I need to get faster or better. And it's like, no, wait. Actually, no, come see me as early as you can, right out of the gate. I don't care if you can't even really ride, because then I'm not breaking those bad habits, right? Those bad habits are not muscle memory yet. So really, the earlier that you can come see us, the better for sure. But yeah, how to break bad habits. I want you to think about this one completely differently, and we're going to talk about what a bad habit is as well. And instead of thinking of a bad habit, how about thinking of it as a plateau, right? How to break a plateau. I think that that's a much better way to look at it, because that's typically what happens is we all, and you've heard me say many times before, right? We all get to the top of our natural ability, our learning curve, and then we plateau out, and then we try different things that may or may not work. So this is how to break bad habits, but think of it differently, right? Think of it as a plateau in your riding. So let's look at that a little bit differently. So what is a bad habit? I put this in my notes because I wanted people to understand a bad habit is something that's not going to get better as you add speed to it. Something that's going to be more risk, right? Add more risk if you try to go quicker or if your grip level comes down. And that's what I wanted to make sure everybody understood, is that something that's not going to get better, right? Something that doesn't give you that pathway of getting better. And that is what we're looking at, a bad habit, right? Something that's going to cause you, unfortunately, pain and suffering. So that's how we look at that. So the other thing I put in my notes on this one is when we look at breaking bad habits, when we have a plateau, it's very easy, right? We've all heard that wonderful definition of insanity, right? Doing something, doing something the same over and over again and expecting a different result. And that's sort of what this ends up being, is that, oh, I'll just go faster, or, I'll get my bike set up a little bit better, or whatever it is. But you've come up against something that's causing an issue. So the first thing that we'll take a look at, and if you go, again, throughout all the podcasts that I've done so far, and some of the writing that I've done as well, all of this is going to sound very familiar, but we're going to put it in this nice little condensed version here. It all comes to, so look at what's holding you back the most, right? What's holding you back the most from attaining your goal? Or what do you perceive that you're not good at, right? What do you perceive? And I'm going to give some 3 examples here at the end, and I'm going to walk you through how I would look at those and how I would do it. And, when we have a new rider, the overview is so much, right? Because we're not looking at making things more precise. So when we get a new rider, and I'll just use it as an example, right? Hey, we want you to use your brakes at turn in. So to them, if they have never used their brakes at turn in, that is a huge concept. Oh my gosh, I'm using my brakes at turn in. It's not necessarily something that's super precise, other than we're just using our brakes at turn in. Well, if you've ridden without using your brakes at turn in for 23 years, and now I need you to use your brakes at turn in, we're going to flip our thinking around a little bit, right? We're actually going, instead of making it a big overview, we're actually going to break it down and make it much more precise. That's how we're going to break a bad habit. Instead of a huge picture, we're going to make it a very small window, a very small something, and I'll give it to you in just a minute, that allows us to concentrate on one little small baby step. And as we add up all those little inches, we add up all those little baby steps together, then they become a big step. If you just try to take a big gigantic swing at it, it's not going to work, and then you're just going to get more frustrated with what you're doing. So we'll take the real key to breaking bad habits is to break down whatever that is whatever's holding you back. to break down what you don't think you're good at, and making it very, very precise, and making these small steps. Each one of these little muscle memory habits, these little small steps you make, will add up to something big, and we'll take you through that. So I wanted to establish those things, and once we start to take a look at those things, it's going to make your life a lot easier. The second part of that is, let's break down a knowledge objective from a skill objective. Because I'm going to talk about, there's some of these things that I'm going to talk about are going to be very skill objectives, right? They're actual skills we need to do. But one of them is also going to be a knowledge objective. Don't underestimate your knowledge objectives. Don't underestimate what you can do off the bike to understand what you're doing. And there's so many different things that you can, again, put it into play to make that happen. I had a great article. I just finished a great article for Road Racing World. Hopefully people got to take a look at it, which is, the 11 things that you can do to improve your motorcycle riding today. And one of the things that I wrote in there is, we look at, knowledge objectives, and we look at skill objectives, and how we can practice these things off the bike. And I put a joke in there that, when I go shopping, I make sure I apex every corner with my shopping cart every time, right? Because then my brain's engaged and it shortcuts that learning curve. And that's simply what this is understanding if that becomes muscle memory on the bike. Oh my gosh, it makes your life so much easier. So let's just dive into some examples, and you'll see how we take you through this. So the first one is overslowing your corner entry, right? So how do we break a habit of overslowing your corner entry? This seems to be the number one, right? When we look at that, oh my gosh, I overslow all of my corner entries. Okay, let's define all of your corner entries. Short radius corner, long radius corner. Oh, it's all of them. Okay, great. Well, when we overslow our corner entries, it's coming from two different things. It's coming from our eyes and our brakes. So if we're not seeing the situation first, we have to make sure that we're going to see the situation first. The second one is motor controls. So when I see somebody that overslows their corner entries, we're going to focus on two things to break this habit. And the first one is our eyes, right? We've got to look at our eyes and see where our eyes are looking, and make sure we see where we want to be letting off the brakes. Because I can work on some of the things with the brakes, but unless we understand where we're supposed to be letting off of them, then it doesn't give us anything to shoot for. So the first sense is getting our eyes engaged and getting that going. So I would work on that for a session or 2 sessions or 3 sessions, work on the eyes. The second one of it is, well, I'm still slow in my corner entries. Guess what we're going to start with? Your motor controls, your initial braking, right? I'm not going to say, oh, you're overslowing your corner entries. Dude, get it in there faster. Just get in there faster. Toss the thing in there. No, we're going to work on our initial brake application, how we go to the brake, and how we build brake pressure. We're going to spend a massive amount of time on that. How you go to the brake should be the same every single time. Your initial, as your fingers go to the lever, should be the same every single time. That's how we start to break a bad habit. That's how we get that going. One of the last podcasts that I had was brake pressure, brake timing, and there was a great thing in there from JD Beach. And JD Beach, even though I've been working with him for 2 years now almost, he's just now understanding the difference in his brake graph and how his braking should be. So this is something that definitely takes some time to figure out. So overslowing corner entries, the first thing I'm going to look at is eyes, make sure our eyes engaged. And how we're going to do that is when I roll off to the throttle, I'll look into where I want to let off the brake. That's our first muscle memory thing that we have to get going. That's the first step in breaking that bad habit. The second step is our initial motor controls, because that sets us up to adjust. If we can start working on, if we get those two things, quite honestly, the rest of it's fairly easy. So that's an example of how we're going to break a bad habit. Is we're not going to dive into the big picture. We're going to dive into the very, very small, intricate part of it. Fading in is another one. Fading in is you want to go into the corner, but instead of holding off to the side of the track, you hold off to the side. Instead, you fade into the corner, end up overslowing it, end up going to the brakes too hard, too late. You end up building brake pressure too late into the corner, and then over slow it, miss your apex, go to the throttle. It just becomes a disaster and fading in. So with the fading in, what we look at with fading in is it's easy to say, oh, well, you know, I'm going to, you know, to fix fading in, I'm just going to turn in later. We got to be a little bit careful with that, because it's almost not a turning in later point. It's just you break the bike off center too early and then you turn in. So with fading in, what we'll do is, again, we'll break that. We'll break that down into a very precise thing, and we'll look at a turn-in point. And I'll literally making sure with that turn-in point where the bike's off center, right? Not as you take the bike off center and then get to that turn-in point and then turn in. So it's more that turn-in point is where the bike's going to come off center. The bike stays straight up and down. When you can do that, you can use more brake pressure as well. What do you know? So use more brake pressure straight up and down. And then when you take the bike off center, the bike hasn't faded in. To do that, we'll be very, very precise on the reference point for taking the bike off center or turning in, right? We'll make that very precise. We'll look at it on video. We'll drive it in the car. We'll walk it. We'll ride our bicycle, whatever it takes to make sure that we're getting that point. And guess what? I will leave my eyes there until I get the result that I want. And you can remember that from the other podcasts and from my order of the sport and the eye drill that I do. Our eyes stay there until you get the result you want. So if our eyes aren't scanning back and forth, it almost always leads to fading in with that. So again, we're going to break that down very precisely, and we're going to leave our eyes at that point where the bike comes off center, where that bike turns in, until we get the result that we want. Then we'll do that. And that's how we look at a fading in problem. We don't say, oh, I'm just going to go in faster and then turn in later, or I'm going to go in slower, turn in. No. Let's just make sure we're very precise and break down that one little spot. The next one we'll talk about is inconsistent lap times. And this is one that ends up being more of a knowledge objective, and really it ends up being a focus issue. And there's also a point, though, where either your riding technique or the bike is holding you back. And that's something that with the pro riders that we really talk about, we work on that a lot. And what we work on is we definitely want to have consistent lap times, because if you go out to a track, and I'm going to make up the lap time, right? You go to a track and you run a 2-minute lap time, then a 2:03, then a 2:05, and then a 2:01, and then a 2:03. So you don't know it's actually working. You don't know what's right or wrong. So we need some report cards for that. We need report cards. We need report cards for pretty much all of it, all of these. Where does that come down to? Our apexes. How we get to the apexes, how we get away from them. So when we look at inconsistent lap times, the first question we'll ask is, are you on all your apexes? Oh, you are. Fantastic. Great. Then once we look at our apexes, we say, okay, what control are you using when on each one of these apexes? And then we can start to decipher whether they're approaching as an entry turn or an exit turn. So once we have that, and we know that that's happening, just by doing those two things, almost always fixes inconsistent lap times, because then our focus level is engaged as well. So then when we start looking at some of these lap times, we're not going to move on from we're not going to really introduce anything new until our lap times start to get within 1 second of each other. So until the lap ends up being within 1 second, we're still going to keep working on what we're working on, because it hasn't proven to be consistent enough. Even with our pro riders, when we go out there and they're in a Moto America practice, the way that we'll look at it with them, and this is working on consistency and how do I go to the next thing? When we have some of our Moto America riders and they're working on speed, or if they're not working on tire durability or suspension change, if they run 3 laps within a couple of tenths of a second, maybe 4 laps within a couple of tenths of a second, we want them in. We'll come in and we'll ask them how'd that go, and because then they've sort of plateaued. So once they get to that plateau, then we can start to say, oh, is the bike holding you back? Are you holding yourself back? We can start to work from there. But we're not going to do that until they can run those 3, 4, 5 laps, right? And you can ask a lot of the riders that I work with. We get to a qualifying time, we get to a certain lap time. our first step is to get back to that lap time at the next session. It's not, yeah, we want to improve it, but our first step is to get back to it. So once we get back to it, then that's when the improvement can happen. So getting back to the inconsistent lap times, again, we're going to break it down. We're going to break it down into how are my apexes? How are my report cards? What control am I using when? And that starts to make it more precise with what we're doing. And then our focus level goes up as well. So with those things, what it really boils down to is, what we talked about, what is a bad habit? And the bad habit ends up turning out to be a plateau. And then you start to attack that plateau the wrong way, right? You start thinking of it as emotionally and not technically. And I wanted to point out how we can fix that. And people need to realize too that, all of this comes in stages, right? You're going to make improvement. You're going to plateau. And a lot of times when you work with us, you realize, oh, you take a step back, but you make 10 steps forward after you come to a different understanding. So we're going to take these plateaus, we're going to take these bad habits, and we're going to make them more precise, because it's, again, each one of these little inch by inch steps that makes things better. And then we're going to give ourselves some report cards to make sure that we're staying on task with what they're doing. And so I want to leave it with this, right? This is not brain surgery. This is not, this isn't something that's crazy. But I kind of want to make sure that everybody understands that to improve, to do it, you got to do it. So be careful with a lot of these superficial fixes, right? They don't work in the long run. Instead, I'm going to ask everybody, you want to get better, you want to fix a bad habit, right? You want to get rid of that plateau, then commit to achieving it. Commit to getting it better. Take it one small step at a time, and you make that muscle memory, and then all of those inches add up.